She's a pro. So, hi everyone. For those I haven't met, I'm Donella. I work at the Chester Library and I do adult programs. Hi, Dory. I think I said hi to you already. I wanted to thank you all for coming. Really excited to have our author of the day today, Michelle Cameron. Just so you all know, we're recording this session. So I will be sending this out to other library patrons as well. Another thing, you might be able to see the closed captions at the bottom, hopefully. I did provide that, if you can see that. We wanted to do that as well. And if you could all keep your speakers on mute for just a minute while Michelle talks. That way it'll reduce the sound. Hopefully you won't hear anything in my background. They're working on the street of all days. I didn't know that. But we're gonna start. I'm going to share my screen for a minute, Michelle. Just wanted to show a few things of yours as you talk. Just one sec, everyone. Okay, so hopefully you can all see this. Michelle, you can see it, correct?
I can.
Oh, wonderful, and I can see you all on the side. So again, this is our first of our Behind the Book series at Chester Library. With everything being virtual, we certainly hope to have Michelle back and other authors kind of talk about our book. So we wanted to do this as well. The book today that Michelle will be talking about is her newest book that launched April 7th, I think.
That's right, yes.
Oh, good. Behind the Ghetto Gates. And you can see her little information about it. I was really interested because I love historical fiction, the romance and all that. You know, I'm like a Downton Abbey girl. So when I found Michelle through Instagram, I thought this was like, we got to have her come talk. And hopefully she'll come to the library as well. When we get permission to come back to the library, Michelle, we'd love to have you come talk about the book in person.
I would love to do that.
If you'd like to have Michelle's information, I'll just keep this up for just a quick second. Michelle, a few of these people already hear me talk, but tell us about yourself, where you're from, and how did you start this particular book?
Sure. So I actually had completed a novel about my 13th century ancestor, which took place during sort of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. And so when I went to look for my next historical fiction, I did want to keep it Jewish themed, but I also wanted to look for a period of time that, you know, had a little bit more joy to it. And, you know, with Jewish history, those are not easy to find. But when I read about Napoleon breaking down the Ghetto Gates as he was making his way through Italy, that is when I sort of discovered the story that I knew I wanted to tell. And that was the impetus of Beyond the Ghetto Gates. So, yeah. And then, you know, I have actually, you note here on the bio that I lived in Israel for 15 years. And one of the things that really helped me in writing all of my books is the fact that I finished high school in Israel. And so I'm really steeped in Jewish history because that was part of the curriculum there. So I think I have a really solid background from which to draw and to start the research process.
Oh, wonderful. Just a really quick note, wanted to let you know about our library staff, and I apologize, Michelle, for interrupting you. The Chester Library, just so you all know, we are available online. So we know a lot of people do not have access to social media. This is our library staff, Leslie, our director, Terry, our assistant director. They're always available. If you know anyone, those of you that are library patrons, Betsy, my colleague, is here online actually as well. You can always have someone reach out to us. We have email. We're doing hotline. We're actually calling a lot of people at home. Like if you know there's a senior, maybe a loan that we need to follow up with that comes to the library, we'd love to do that. That's just something. Did I miss anything about that, Betsy, about us contacting them? Oh, she's quiet. That's right.
No,
she's on mute.
those are, I had to unmute, sorry. No, I think those are exactly what we're trying to do. And also for people whose registration might have lapsed, we're connecting you with the opportunity to, until the end of May, to go ahead and renew your registration, and then we'll discuss fines afterwards. So So those are some things we want to make it easier for patrons to come back to the library or to stay with the library and then to join in things such as this that we're doing, as well as to take advantage of our digital offerings such as magazines, movies, books, all kinds of things. So yes, that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Betsy. Here's our group, our list of trustees. Again, they're always on social media. So hopefully if you like this session with Michelle, when we want to bring her back, you can certainly give all these people feedback. So Michelle, I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut into that. I wanted to put up your pictures as we talk. So has anyone here, do you have some of your students might be here? Has anyone actually, if they can unmute themselves, read the book? And can we start with Celeste? Let me see if I can mute you. Hi, Celeste. I want to kind of make this a conversation rather than just.
Yes,
Hi.
I finally unmuted myself. Hi,
Great.
Michelle. My sister is I.N Sanchez.
Oh, right. Yes, of course.
I.N was a student of Michelle's and had her book published in November. But I'm only on page 44, unfortunately, so I haven't gotten very far, Michelle.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you for reading. Absolutely. I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
I will. I just need to find time.
I understand that.
It's all tough, right?
Absolutely.
We just
Yeah.
had someone enter the group too, Lana. Hi, Lana. I think Lana just entered the group. And Christian, let me see if I can unmute you. Christian, are you familiar with Michelle's works? Could you unmute yourself? Let me see if I can unmute you. One sec. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was interested to join, number one, because I like to read books. I like history. Originally, I'm French, so when I saw French Army, I said, okay, that's interesting to me as well. And that's it. So I haven't read them, so I'm interested to listen to the conversation. Maybe at the end I will buy the book, so let's see.
All right. I hope
Great.
so.
And I'm going to go to Dory next, so we can all kind of get to know each other during the conversation and know the author. So Dory, what's your experience? What brought you to this group today?
Well, I am another She Writes Press author and found out about the book on the She Writes Press group. And I'm an author too, based in Seattle. And I just bought the book and haven't started it yet. So I'm eager to hear what Michelle has to say.
Okay.
Wonderful. And we'll just go to one more person and then we'll get Michelle to talk, but I'm not skipping anyone. I'm going to go to Nancy because Nancy is one of our patrons. Nancy, if I can unmute. Hi, Nancy, you're unmuted. So what brought you here today?
I thought they looked interesting and I like the aspect of the history, so I was hoping to learn more about it in this discussion.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Okay, I do have a list of questions for Michelle, but I thought, Michelle, you're so used to doing this. Maybe if you can start off talking about the book and we, I have the pictures up on the screen, we can start that way and then I can kind of interject questions.
Sure. No, that's great. So the book is set during, as I said earlier, Napoleon actually came to with his forces in 1796 and 97. And he was there primarily to chase the Austrians out of the country. But as he was going through, he was also looting the country of all of its artwork and religious artifacts, which, has happened with conquerors before and after. Before he got Ancona, is the beautiful city on the hill there, there were, let me rephrase. I had no idea about, first of all, the history. Certainly, I had never even heard of Ancona before, learning that this was the first place where Napoleon tore down the Jewish Ghetto Gates and emancipated the Jews. A few things happened as I was researching Ancona. And the first was that I learned that Ancona was the world center of ketubah making. Ketubah is Jewish marriage certificate, and those are some of those really gorgeous documents that you see there. The scribes and the craftsmen in Ancona were the first actual world to illuminate these documents. And they also made them very distinctive by use of what's called the Ogé arch, which is that curve at the point at the top of it. And the reason why that's really important is because when you go to see exhibits of Judaica, as I've done in countries like Toronto and Edinburgh and even New York City, I would always find one of these, point to it and say, that came from Ancona. And I was always right. So discovering this was something that helped me in terms of giving my heroine and her family a profession. They created these gorgeous ketubot, which is the plural of ketubah. Also, at the top of one of the 3 mountains that surround Ancona, there was a cathedral. And in the cathedral was a portrait of the Virgin Mary, of the Madonna, which you see also pictured here. And the reason why that was important is because before Napoleon arrived, the portrait seemed to come to life, turn its head, weep, smile on people. The people of Ancona took that to mean that Napoleon would never be able to conquer their city. They were very wrong. He did manage to come in, but there was a really interesting anecdote about how he went to the cathedral specifically to loot it, and he faced down the portrait, and something in that portrait freaked him out. And the way the story goes is he took up a gold cloth and he threw it over. There isn't a historical novelist alive, I think, who, hearing that story, wouldn't end using it in their novel. And so I absolutely did. And then the portrait is a very fundamental part of the novel, of the people who first thought that they saw it, as well as some fictionalized accounts of what happened to it after Napoleon left the city and the portrait was still there. So, you know, it was really, again, as I said, I knew nothing about Ancona or any of this before I started to do my research. Okay. Dana, you got to unmute yourself.
I said, I love the gown. I wanted to hear more about the gown. That was one of the things when I saw on Instagram, I thought, I was like, wow, this is like amazing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happens is when you research the period is you have to research, you know, what the people wore, what they ate, what they did fun. And so that gown actually ended up in a reception that was held in Ancona. It was the dress that my heroine wore the night that she received a proposal of marriage. Not a proposal of marriage that she necessarily wanted.
It wasn't received, it was forced upon her.
Indeed.
And
Okay.
so, and how do you, actually, I had a couple questions. So how did you come up with the different names of your characters? I think that was one of the questions I asked, because, you know, how do you come up with the names?
Sure. I mean, I actually go online and I will look up, for example, Italian Jewish names. And I will try and make them appropriate for the period. And there are definitely some names that are, you know, if you're Jewish and your name is Pnina, it could be Pnina almost at any point in time in Jewish history. But there were some names, for example, Maria's best friend, Dolce, which, you know, of course means sweet. There was a very deliberate choice of picking that name because, you know, anyone who's read the book knows that she's not as sweet as all of that.
Oh, great. And let me go to, and let's see. Now, this is another thing, because you're talking about, this is a historical book. Are there any type of like secrets in the book, like a reader should look out for? Like Dory is new to reading the book. So maybe you can give her a hint of something that she should take note of when she's reading the book.
Sure. There are actually quite a few secrets in this book that people find out about. The person who Morel falls in love with, she keeps that secret for a long time. The fact that her brother passes away, and her cousin comes in, and he's a great lover of secrets, and he sort of sneaks around. She compares him to a cat at one point, where he's always hiding and discovering secrets. So those are some of the things, sort of end up being revealed later on.
So with the background, what was one of the hardest things to write about in the book? Because you're so immersed in the history and the culture. Can you talk about that? Like, what was really difficult?
Sure. So it's one of the scenes happens before Napoleon arrives in Ancona. And there was a riot in the Jewish ghetto. And this is historically accurate. The Catholics of the town were afraid. They were afraid Napoleon was going to take away their religion, because of course this was the time of the French Revolution. French Revolution had done away with the religion. And they were afraid that the Jews were going to support Napoleon when he came in. And so there were, there was a riot. Many people were maimed. Many people were killed, and I had to describe all of that. In fact, I described it from 2 points of view. I described it as it was happening, as Morel was watching it. I also described it from the point of view of one of the Catholics, Emilio, who's really the villain of the piece, and how he took great relish in what he did. And I think both of those pieces were very difficult to put down on paper.
We actually have a question from Dory. Dory asked, I don't know if everyone can see the chat, how does the Jewish population know about the Madonna?
So at this point in time, because the two populations are merging, however uneasily, they found out about it. They found out about it also because it was the talk of the town, especially after Napoleon got into the picture. But it really did become common knowledge. There were actually candlelight processions to honor the Madonna. These are things that they would not have missed.
Okay, let me just look through the questions. Any questions? Let me just look through. Betsy, any questions? I know you're on mute. So I guess I have another question. Oh, go ahead, Betsy.
No, I'm good. I'm fascinated.
Okay.
Great.
That's good. I think there's a question from Eileen. I'm seeing them, so maybe I'll put the
Eileen?
chat bar up.
Let me just look at Eileen. Hi, Eileen, you're on. Let me unmute. Eileen, did you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Michelle. How are
Hi, Eileen.
you? Glad to see you. Can you tell us what prompted you to write about really a fairly unknown point of history? I didn't know about it, and now I.
Yeah. No, it's so again. I really enjoy writing about the Jewish that no one knows about. People talk about the fact that really people think about Jewish history, through the period of the Romans, and then you kind of pick it up again at the Holocaust. And there's this whole span of Jewish history that takes place in between. So again, my first novel, The Fruit of Her Hands, about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, which people didn't know about. Then this novel, which I was specifically looking for a joyous period in Jewish history to write about. And so I stumbled across this one in a book by the name of M.A.I.N, by Michael Goldfarb, where he wrote about this episode. And it fascinated me. So that was really why. I don't know that, I mean, I do know what the next book will be, and that is also somewhat unknown, but at that I have to go find another unknown period to write about.
Oh, I'm confident you will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. We have a question from Lana. Lana, I'm actually it'll be more interesting if I unmute people. Lana, I unmuted you. Did you want to ask your question? You actually had, I think how did you start your research? You want to ask? Hello? I don't know. There you are.
No, okay.
Just curious to know, how did you start research, your research? What did you, I mean, you already answered partially in the previous question, but I think we set these questions at the same time, but I was just curious whether you found something and you decided to write about it, whether you read it somewhere, how it did started, but I think you partially answered the question. Yeah.
I did, but I can expand on. I mean, again, I started out with the book Emancipation, but that's really just sort of a and so among the things that I had to do, I had to learn more about the city of Ancona itself. I had to learn about the military campaign through Italy. And that's probably the part that terrifies me the most. There's going to be some Napoleon expert out there who's going to point whatever mistake made and whatever battle it is. I'm sure that's going to happen. I had to learn, as I said, about clothing and the furniture and things like that. So there was a tremendous amount to sort of try to encompass. My basic process when I start a novel like this one is I give myself about 3 months to do that research. And then I start writing. And the reason why I try to stick to that is I know historical novelists who just get so deep in the research because they love it so much that they never really quite pull themselves out of it. So I'm researching the entire time I'm writing because there's always something you don't know, but I am deliberately trying to write my way through that research at that point. And I think someone, I think it was Dory, who's, oh, are you a library? Because the books behind me, those are just some of the books I used to reach. And there's the internet, and there's artwork, and there's going to museums. And so it's a lot that's into writing a book like this one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Lana. We're going to go to Dory next. Hi, Dory.
Hi. My question is a question. I write historical fiction, and I've gotten this question, so I thought I would toss it to you because it's one of the harder questions to answer.
Thank you.
It isn't very nice, but in the various characters you created, did you see aspects of your own personality in some of them?
It's interesting.
That's good.
My heroine is has a passion for I'm terrible at numbers. I'm so bad. I write to my students. I mean, almost every single time I write to my students, I make a mistake with the date. It's just something I do. But my son, my old son, very gifted mathematician. So there are parts of him in there. I think every writer, puts parts of themselves in their characters, but I think they put parts of other people in their characters too. In my previous book, my heroine's mother-in-law was really my mother-in-law. And I was terrified that she would recognize herself. Said today, earlier on, that you never recognize yourself in fiction really bad. And it was really bad. So yeah, I think definitely it's of myself, but there are parts of other people too.
Okay, I unmuted myself. I'm going to go to Lisa's question next, and then I'll go back to Eileen, okay? So Lisa, you are unmuted, so you can go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is really, thank you. And I was wondering, with the research, did you have the opportunity to actually go to the town, spend time in the town, and maybe search some of the people that might have had, relatives who lived in that time frame with more specific stories?
Yeah, I have not yet managed to do that. And I'm dying to get there and to see what I got right and what I got wrong. But it just wasn't going to happen financially, unfortunately. So I'm waiting for the day.
Well, maybe when the day comes, we could all read the book and you could have a pilgrimage and we'll all go.
I like that plan. I like that plan a lot. Good.
Michelle, I'm on board with you. I'll go with you.
Okay, great. Good. You got to unmute, didn't you? Unmute, Danielle.
I'm just thinking. No, it's okay. Eileen, are you
Yes.
still there? Yeah, I just unmuted you. I'm muting myself because I know they're fixing my street in the back. I apologize.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe, Michelle, I'm sorry I was not here when things started, so maybe you already answered this. But how did you learn about the Madonna and the tears?
Okay. So, no, I only mentioned, I talk about the instrumental part you played in this, Eileen. I stumbled across the story and I said, I have to find more about this. And I was talking about it actually in one of my classes that Eileen was in at that point in time. And she talked about this with her sister-in-law, who ended up finding the Vatican's account of it. And once I had name, able to purchase literally the Vatican's of the Miracle Madonna. Ancona was the first city that this happened in, but actually after that, it happens in a couple of other towns and then in Rome. And they all told us as a sign Napoleon was never, ever going to be able to defeat them. So yes, and it's a great instance of finding something that's kind of, that you have no idea that you're going to find, that then turns into a really important part of the story. So great question.
Well, yes, it was fun to be part of that too. Can another question in there?
Sure.
For
Am
it.
I still on? This is 21st century, right? And how do you find this theme is relevant to this time? What's most important? What message would you like for us to have learned from reading this book?
Well, there are a few things that I feel I write about in pretty much all of our books. And one is how deeply rooted prejudice can be in terms of how the Catholics in Ancona were so separate from the Jews, and that they had learned from their background, their parents, that the Jews were terrible, terrible people. They deserved to be shut up in the ghetto every night. And what I have in the novel is I have a relationship between two characters, a Jewish soldier, Daniel, and Francesca, who was the woman who actually first saw the Miracle Madonna. And they grow to know one another. And so one of the things that I'm talking about with this is how can the people who have been brought up very, very differently, who are suspicious of one another, how can they get to know one another and perhaps even learn to respect one another ultimately? Another thing that I write about a lot is what happens when you are trying to assimilate into another culture. There's France, even before we got to Italy, were emancipated. The French Revolution made them citizens for the first time in centuries. They had full rights of being French citizen. But the thing was, and this happened in Italy as well, that started to erode some of their religious traditions. And so another one of the themes that I talk about a lot is, where do you draw that line? Where do you safeguard religious tradition versus acclimating and assimilating into the general population? And I think both of these are questions that are important even today. A personal story is that my son, my youngest, is engaged to a girl who is not Jewish. And one of the most difficult moments for me was when they put up a picture on Instagram of my son carrying home Christmas. And that for me was rough, even though she is a lovely person, delighted to have her joining the family. But that moment, there's something bred in us, I think, that makes that difficult.
Yeah, I think I know what you call that unconscious bias.
Yes.
That you really are so surprised when a feeling, a reaction that happens, and you are sure that that could never have been in your head.
Absolutely. And yet it does.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Can I ask another question?
All right, last one, Eileen. I got 3 more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding.
As I'm reading it, I'm working my way through and loving it. And some of what you just said about, the differences in the challenges of the time then and now, it must have been very hard for you to write some hateful things about Jewish traditions and families in the book.
Yeah.
How did you manage that?
I think that any writer has to empathize with all sorts of character and to understand what's driving them, understand their motivations. And so one of the things in the book is I tried extremely hard, even though it doesn't sound like it, I think, based on what I've been saying today, I tried very hard to have very sympathetic characters, very unsympathetic Jew characters. But in the book is actually not a sympathetic character. So, and you try and show the balance of that. But one of the things that I teach class when I teach my aspiring writers is that you have to ahead of your villains. You have to, because what happens is the villain of the story thinks the story is all about them. And so you have to understand where they're coming from, what their motivations are, and to really sort of get into that dark side along with them. It's not easy, but it has to be done if it's going to be credible.
You did a beautiful job.
Well, thank you. Good.
And I actually had a question about that. I'm glad Eileen brought that up, because one of the questions I had was, what about the ethics about writing about historical figures? Because you're kind of talking about it, because that's so hard when you're talking about a villain or someone that's not liked in the book. Like, maintaining, that the ethics is part of that. Could you talk about that? I mean, a little bit more, because that's really interesting to me. of how you
Sure,
could do
no. So, I mean, my historical characters, there were historical characters in the book that no one would know about. Francesca and her daughter Barbara were written up in these Vatican records, which makes them, in my mind, historical. The two of the main Jew characters were named to the municipal council by Napoleon. That makes them historical characters, but no one would know about them. So that gives me the freedom sort of superpose what I need from them on top. But there are also characters like Napoleon that people have very strong opinions about Napoleon. I belong to the Napoleonic Historical Society, and people have very strong opinions about him. So I think from the ethical point of view, what I tried to do is often when I put his own words in his voice, you know, so I read his memoirs, I read what other people wrote about him, his speeches, and so I tried to pull out his character based on that and make him as true to as possible. So, you know, I think that is part of the ethics of tried historic characters.
We had a question from another one from Dory. I think, Dory, let me unmute you. So Dory, you asked your question. Go ahead, Dory, I unmuted you correctly.
Got one. I know that in France, as you mentioned earlier, Napoleon closed the churches, and I just wondered, Italy is a very Catholic place, and I wonder if Napoleon closed the churches and the synagogues in his efforts to get rid of religion in Italy.
Actually, I think he recognized that that would be almost impossible. But what's interesting is when Napoleon became emperor, he brought the church back. In fact, he forced the Pope to France to crown him. And then he basically took the crown out of the Pope's hands and crowned himself, which for Napoleon is very appropriate. But even at this point, France, things were starting to change. So it was really the revolution took away religion from everybody. They did things like they instituted a 10-day week, which meant, for example, you couldn't go to church on Sunday. If you were Jewish, you couldn't go to synagogue on Saturday because those days didn't exist. But this point in time, while Napoleon is out of the country, things were starting to slowly, very slowly, even normalize themselves in terms of religion in France. So I actually have a moment there where one of the characters hears the church bells and remembers a letter he just got from his mother, who's a very devout Catholic, saying the church being allowed to ring out again. So, yeah.
Thanks. Anything else, Dory? Did you want to add or another question?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a question for Lana, or Lana, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. She wanted me to just read it. I think everyone can see it on the chat. Did you experience writer's block while writing this book?
It's a great question. I don't believe in
I get asked that a lot, right?
Yeah, I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in, there are days, I always describe them as the damn chipping rock, that I am just like there and trying to get to it, and it just isn't coming. But actually, the book dedicated to my youngest son, who he works in publishing. He's an M.A.I.N editor. He was forced all the way through to help me out with this book, and he's a talented writer. And one of the things he taught me is when he was younger and starting to write, and he's a voracious writer, he would say that he would make a date with the muse, this whom he called Angela. Don't ask me why. And he would say, I'll show up for our date. Some days she does, some days she doesn't, but if I don't show up, she absolutely won't. So I learned from that. And so I sit down and I do my best every single day to get something on page. And some days it's chipping rock.
Okay. We had another question from Celeste. I'm going to unmute her and mute myself.
It worked. Hi, Michelle again.
Hi, Celeste.
I think you answered this as to how long did you spend researching? I think you kind of touched on that already, right?
Well, I spent 3 months exclusively researching, but I spent I would say about 3 years writing the book. And there wasn't a single day where there wasn't some research involved as I was writing and revising the book. And I did a lot of revision on this book. I don't think this was my most heavily revised book ever. So yeah, so you could say that I did intensive research for 3 months, but again, it was literally to the day I gave it to the publisher.
Oh, okay. Can I ask another? What's the most interesting surprise in your research?
I think that the two that I mentioned were the most. The fact that this was the World Center of Ketubah making was a great surprise, because again, it led credence to sort of the Jewish life in that ghetto, as well as the Miracle Madonna, which I would never in 1,000 years have thought that I would stumble upon that. So I think it really was those two. Some of my students know I talk about the gifts of research, and those two were enormous gifts for me. You know, they changed the of the whole book.
Okay, thank you. Can't wait to finish it.
Okay.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Does anyone else have some questions? We're at 3:16, so we did really well. You guys made my job easy. Thank you. Neil, you have anything?
No, not really. I'm sorry I came in a bit late. But yes, enjoying this back and forth very much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Neil. It's nice to see you, Neil.
Thanks.
Now, Allison, let me unmute Allison. Allison, I see that pretty. Where are you? Do you have any questions? I can't unmute you for some reason.
Is it? Oh,
can you hear there us? You are. Yeah, now I can. You guys look like you're on the beach, so I just wanted to see if you had any questions.
We're here. We're actually on our lawn. We're sitting out on our lawn, enjoying the beautiful day and enjoying Michelle's description of her process, because I'm one of her students in her novel continuum class. And the minute the question was asked about writing difficult characters, I thought the villain thinks that the novel is all about him.
Like I said, I say that all the time to my students. Yeah.
But it's always so useful to hear somebody else's process. And it's also, as you say, it's such a fascinating period. I mean, I'm also an art historian. So for me, the question is, where do the Ketubah masters learn their miniature skills? You know, are they interacting with the monastic scripture or the University of Bologna? It's amazing that there's such separateness, and yet at the same time, as you say, they're aware of these procession, the Virgin icon, and there is this beautiful miniature tradition that's decked this ketubah, and it's spectacular, but it also makes you realize that there's somehow things are through those ghettos.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And again, it was fascinating for me to learn that this was where illumination of ketubot really started. So I'm not quite sure about, you know, how they actually learned the skills, but they picked them up somewhere.
Yeah, and brought them to an exquisite.
Oh yes, yeah, no, they're gorgeous.
Yeah,
ketubot.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Allison. Eileen had one question, and then I want to see if Lorraine, are you okay? Give me a thumbs up. You have any questions? Awesome. Okay, Eileen, I unmuted you. Just wanted to see if you maybe you wanted to wrap up with a question. I have a couple fun questions for Michelle before we end.
Okay. Michelle, I love to know from authors, who was your favorite character?
I mean, obviously Morel was my heroine, and you know, so she definitely took the she was in the spot the whole time, I think. But in terms of the male characters, I have a grandness for Daniel. And I think Daniel, in the next book, Daniel's going to have a bigger role. And I won't say any more about that.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's 3:20. So Eileen, do you have anything else? Because we're gonna close out because I know a few people have to leave. It's so great. This is fun. This is like a book club, Michelle.
Yeah, it really was.
We do every week, right? So I always have the silly questions for the author. So the first one was, what was your favorite childhood book?
Yes, okay. I read voraciously. I still read voraciously, and I read eclectically. But I mean, my first experience with reading was my entire family did this terrible thing we read at the dinner table. And I remember at the age of 5, I would bring a book, and it didn't matter if it was upside down or not, but I was somebody else. But I loved all of the usual suspects as a child. I mean, I love Little Women. I love Anne of Green Gables. You know, when I got older, I'm still a huge, huge Jane Austen fan. For this particular book, there was a book by the name of Desiree by Anna Marie Salenko, and Desiree was Napoleon's first love. And she then became Queen of Sweden. This is a true story. So that book was amazing. It also really gave me my first sense of Napoleon. And so the Napoleon in that book is really my Napoleon. So I would say that is probably the perfect book in terms of a childhood book that I just loved. A young adult book, really.
Oh. So if you didn't write, what would you do for a living?
Everything I've ever done has been connected in some way to writing. Although for years I was a creative director and a project manager for a digital firm, I will tell you that I hated it. And I'm very glad that I can make a career both teaching, writing, and writing myself.
Awesome.
So yeah.
And here's the last question. Do you, I know there's a lot of book reviews, but do you ever Google yourself and see the reviews? That's something fun. Or do you just ignore them?
I don't ignore them, but one thing that, you know, I hear over and over and over again from seasoned writers is if you ever get a bad review, ignore it. Don't like take on the reviewer. I know people who have, and it never, ever, ever ends well for the writer. So, you know, I would say that right now I'm very cautious about my reviews. I will glance and see, you know, how many stars, but you know, I'm waiting for the bad reviews. They will come. You know, every writer gets them because you can't write for everybody.
Yeah, great. Well, we're actually losing people. I know everybody's working as well. This is fun, but I want to, Michelle, first thank you. You're great. You're just a delight. So we love to have you back at Chester Library in person or virtually again. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I think I'm going to close out the session. It was nice to see everyone. And thank you for those on the West Coast that came out. Michelle, this was awesome.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun. Thank you all. Great questions, well asked.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Donella. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. I'm going to close out. Michelle, I'll get you in a sec.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.